Alright, so we're going to look at the first 10 days of the anatomy study so far. Not been the most crazy 10 days in terms of output, I'll be honest. Just been very busy. But I haven't missed a single day, and that is what matters. That's what I'm really going for, is consistency above all else. Well, consistency and quality of the illustrations. So, I wanted to start with a study of the scapula. Now, typically, when you're doing an anatomy study, you're going to be probably wanting to do either starting with the pelvis or the rib cage, just because like those are two of the major masses. They're the connection for an insane amount of muscles and stuff. And I have studied the rib cage, I've studied the pelvis, I've studied the spine. Those are incredibly important and probably a good place to start. And I will definitely cover that in this study moving forward. But I thought that the scapula, it's a lesser known muscle or bone rather for me, so I thought it would be an interesting start here. So yeah, starting off with just a standard view of the front, or I guess back of the scapula, depending on how you look at it. So we've got the glenoid fascia. It's a pretty shallow, small little socket for the humerus. Got the acromion, classic bony landmark. It's a connection for a lot of things. Super obvious, almost on any body type. Great bony landmark. Definitely something you want to know. The spine of the scapula, kind of sort of rotating back and around, and again another huge connection point for a lot of stuff. And then you get to the side view, which one thing that I found about the scapula is that it looks completely different from different angles. It's kind of hard to get an angle that really captures what this bone is all about. It looks completely different from all front, side, top view. You're looking at it and seeing completely different structure. So it's kind of interesting in that way, but also a little bit difficult to wrap your head around. We have the coracoid process, which is not really. It's weird in the sense that it's not palpable. Like with the acromion, you can feel it. It's a bony landmark. It's easy to see. Whereas the coracoid process is like this whole little bony protrusion, which is totally deep in the inside the shoulder. You're not feeling it. You're not really seeing it. It's just sort of there. Maybe you could see it on a very lean person, but I'm actually not sure on that, so don't quote me. But it is the connection for a lot of things. It is important to know. Yeah, side view of the glenoid fascia. Again, very shallow socket, so I try to indicate some rather shallow shading on that. Spine of the scapula looks kind of strange from this angle. But yeah, so one thing is for these drawings, I've been really trying to, juggle between trying to make them look very nice and aesthetic, but still be kind of functional and practical. So I've been doing little like bits of calligraphy and trying to draw out render things out to the best of my abilities within reason. Because this is an anatomy study, but I also want to practice drawing. I want to have all of this have a certain air of professionality to it. I'm trying to get better at just like raw drawing throughout this process, kind of killing two birds with one stone. And I also think that it just helps with morale, I guess. When you see nice drawings, when you see it's like, oh, well, this is not just like some dinky little scribbled drawing of a scapula with some slap together name is on it. It's like, no, this looks nice. Probably maybe not something you'd want to post on Twitter or something, but still, it's a nice aesthetic little drawing. A little hit and miss. Some days are better than others, just because, this is a little extra thing that I've been doing on top of everything else. Yeah, so we have the top view here. I wanted to include a little bit of the clavicle and humerus in these two bottom drawings. I will be covering those both later on, but for now, just in addition to just drawing the bone on its own, I find that adding a little bit of context and little bits of anatomy here and there kind of helps with understanding both the structure and functionality of the bone, just because like you're understanding a bit more of the context. So yeah, the humerus inserts kind of on the back of the acromion, kind of creates this little box shape. Humerus has a quite the curve to it on this this end here, and then of course the humerus placement is super obvious. It's just right into the glenoid fascia. Um, so yeah, nice and simple and straightforward here. We have the this big like dip, and that's something that's not super clear from either of these angles. I mean, maybe from this one a little bit, but there's like this whole kind of scoop out of the scapula. And that, to a large extent, is filled by the supraspinatus, which is a muscle that's pretty much entirely covered up by other things, but perhaps on a pretty well-developed physique, it can make a pretty big difference in kind of these forms. Yeah, so there's a couple of ligaments here, which I thought were kind of interesting. I don't have them labeled here, just because they had some pretty crazy names. And maybe there's sort of a juggling act between what is useful and not useful information. I'm not studying to become a surgeon here. I am primarily concerned ultimately with how all of these anatomical details affect the surface forms of the figures that I'm drawing from imagination or from reference. So I don't need, something of the Corrucate process. Do I need to know the exact form and structure and angle of it? Probably not, just because it's entirely under the surface. Unless you're drawing a skeleton, you're probably not going to be drawing it. So I'm not going to quite go to the level of labeling little ligaments and stuff, but I did find that these ligaments were interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, this ligament that connects the acromion and coracoid process is connecting one bit of the same bone. Like, there's no hinge joint or anything. Like, this isn't like multiple bones connected together. Like, this is literally just one single contiguous bit of bone that is being reinforced by this ligament, kind of bridging the gap from here to here, which I thought was interesting. I guess it's for stability. It's just like adding a bit of extra structure and strength. The ligament's also going to be kind of protecting the connections here. I know that the supraspinatus is going to be kind of snaking its way through here. There's some tendons that you want to protect. So I think I'd assume the function of this ligament is for stabilizing the coracoid and acromion process, as well as adding a little bit of protection. And interestingly enough, there's also some ligaments that connect the coracoid process directly to the clavicle. And I'm not 100% sure what the nature of ligaments are, like in terms of how stretchy. I'm sure there's a little bit of give. But I'd imagine not a whole lot. So it is interesting that the whole chordae girdle, like the whole clavicle and scapula combination, is kind of locked down by those ligaments. Like this joint right here has a pretty limited range of motion because like the clavicle can't swing around too much or go up or down or kind of all over the place on that joint, because there's these two ligaments here that are kind of locking down its range of motion. I mean, it could be compressed a little bit, but it can't be like pulled up or from side to side too much. So very limited range of motion on this joint, which I thought is interesting. It might help with understanding a bit of the, how this whole chordae girdle setup works in different arm positions, because we all kind of know what it's like, what's going on in sort of a standard relaxed pose, but in more dynamic poses, I think it's good to know that that the clavicle and scapula are kind of locked in place in relation to each other. They can move a little bit, but not a whole lot. Less than you'd think. So moving on here, this is definitely my favorite drawing so far. I'm really happy with this one. It's got little issues. It's definitely by no means perfect. There's some things that I'd change, but for a first draft of this general illustration, I'm pretty happy with it. I was using this kind of fancy 2mm mechanical pencil, which is super like clean and easy to sharpen to a really nice taper. So, yeah, these are just like, this was kind of a little, just for fun, basically. I mean, it was not really necessary, but it actually does speed up the process and make things a bit more consistent, because it's so much easier to just like continuously keep this really sharp. And that allows for just some really tight little calligraphy and just some smooth shading. So there was some things like adding just little bits of like calligraphy and cross hatching, which I find just adds like a little bit of extra character and texture to these drawings that makes them just interesting, just pop a little more. Are they necessary for the anatomical understanding? Absolutely not. They are purely just me trying to practice good drawing. And there's definitely a huge amount of room for improvement here, but I am pretty happy with this for now anyways. So yeah, we see here the supraspinatus connecting into this this little divot here, which we saw on this page, this connection right here. We have the infraspinatus hogging up most of the space on the main body of the scapula, connecting to the humerus, head of the humerus. I'm not sure if that's a technical term for top of the humerus, you know what I mean. And then we have the teres minor here and the teres major, and again, just to provide like a little bit of interesting context to all of this, I included the tricep, which this wasn't really a tricep study, but repetition in all things, I guess. Good to know. Adds a nice little bit of context. I think it makes the drawing more interesting, and doesn't take away at all from the main focus. So yeah, really nice little, well, I'm happy with this drawing, at least for now. And I think the structure of the infraspinatus could probably have been indicated in a slightly different way. It doesn't really look quite right, but again, practice, practice, practice. So yeah, the main function of the infraspinatus, there's a lot of functions. It moves the arm kind of like forward and back. It does a lot. It's responsible for a lot. But a big one, and the one that I was trying to illustrate with this drawing, which the shading is not nearly as good, but whatever, is the rotator cuff action of being able to like kind of rotate the arm. There's a lot of muscles involved with that, but part of it is the infraspinatus, the teres minor, and the teres major. And this is kind of an ambitious drawing, because it really had to be pretty much entirely from imagination, because I could not find this angle. What I was trying to do is kind of look down, or kind of up at the at this whole shoulder girdle, and just kind of examine how the infraspinatus, the teres minor, they're connecting from this side of the humerus, so they're going to be able to pull the humerus this way. And then you have the teres major, which kind of it connects at the same kind of general area on the scapula, but it flips around. It goes around the other way, so it creates leverage. It's the antagonist to the teres minor. Kind of. It's weird because they both connect kind of to the same area on the scapula, so for some motions they work together, but when it comes to the rotation, they work against each other. They're their own antagonists. So kind of a complex bit of motion and stuff to untangle, but very, very interesting nonetheless. So yeah, that I just drew this arrow to kind of indicate the rotation of the humerus kind of on this axis. And again, the shading. This is, I don't know. It's unfortunate because this is such a nice drawing, and then this one was just like, it's just a miss. And I think it was because with this one, I had better reference. I wasn't having to invent things as much, so I was just focusing 100% really on just like interesting design and shading. Whereas this one, I was really focused on just like trying to get this point across, and then the shading became a secondary element. And ideally, we'd like to always have every element be at a pretty high level, at least for me on this study. So now we have the humerus, and this is where I'm currently at. So didn't cover a huge amount of ground for 10 days, but again, this is just like a little extra thing that I'm doing on top of everything. And I do hope to eventually be doing this a lot more, but for now I'm just focusing on consistency, just doing it every single day. So yeah, the humerus, upper arm bone. This is a pretty long, lanky humerus, which was, I think I maybe made it a little bit too long and lanky. To be honest, this is the humerus of someone who's very, very tall, or has very, very long arms at least. And just from a design perspective, I really like a longer, more lanky humerus, just because, I don't know, they tend to like, the top and bottom tend to not be that much bigger or smaller from person to person. They just kind of like shorten. So it just looks a little bit stumpy when you see like a shorter humerus. To me, just not as aesthetically pleasing. But with all things, you vary it from body type to body type. But anyways, just something to keep in mind with these bones, just the variation from body to body. So yeah, the lesser tubercle, greater tubercle. It's kind of, I get what they're talking about with the greater tubercle. The lesser tubercle is not as clear to me exactly what's being referred to in the diagrams. But I do know that these tubercles are the connection points for various muscles, which I don't know off the top of my head. We're working on it. There is a reason I'm doing this study. But even if I did know it, it's good to review it. But yeah, the humerus, again, trying not the best, especially with this one. I got interrupted. I was drawing this, and then the power went out, so I didn't quite finish it, and couldn't quite get back exactly into the rhythm the next day, but it's alright. Again, little calligraphy elements to it, a little bit of cross-shading, cross-hatching. So yeah, radial fascia, coronoid fascia, not sure how to pronounce those. Medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle, those are important for certain connections of muscles. Definitely going to be good to know for drawing the elbow and the little bumps and all of the muscles and complications there. That is something that I am really unfamiliar with. I've done a study of that area before years ago, and I've pretty much forgot most of it. And yeah, my elbows are definitely not a strong point of my illustrations. But yeah, so the epicondyles. This was interesting. Just I'm going to do the back view of this little connection here of the radius and ulna, this joint. But I did find it was interesting. I did kind of exaggerate these forms a little bit. You have a little cylinder that tapers to be a little more narrow in the center, and that's where the connection for the ulna. So you can tell for this connection, it's almost like a Lego joint. It's very There's not a lot else going on with it. It's pretty simple. But I did find it was interesting for the radius that it's much more of a shallow socket and ball. So the radius is able to rotate with the supination and pronation of the forearm, and at the same time hinge at the elbow. So it's like, and that makes sense, I guess, that you'd be able to do that, because when your arm is at an angle, you can still supinate and pronate your forearm, and when it's extended, you can supinate and pronate your forearm. So, yeah, when the bone is what would be the technical term for that? Just unbent, I guess. It's a ball socket, and it's rotating kind of on this area here, rotating with the supination pronation of the forearm. But then even when it's rotated, then it's rotating kind of here. So it's like a three-dimensional little ball joint. Very interesting, design-wise. And good to know. Something that I never really quite grasped, I think, until now. So, yeah, that's where I'm at with this study for the first 10 days.